Good morning. I'm Patricia Doxey. I'm a reporter here with the Daily Freeman, and I'm here today with Ulster County Comptroller Gallagher, who was elected in November and took office on January 1st. Welcome, March, and thank you for joining us today. We'll be chatting about an hour about you, the office, what you found, what your plans are, and just other issues surrounding the office and the county. We're joined today by Yvonne Lahara, our senior editor, who will be managing the technological end of things. And, it's been 22 days since you've taken office. I'd like to give you just an opportunity to talk a little bit about what you've found and what you've been doing in those first 20 days or 22 days.
Thanks for inviting me in. I really appreciate the opportunity to be here today with you guys and also just out to the readers who are watching or who may watch later. Especially since I think we were saying this before we were on air, that people don't really know what the Office of the Comptroller does. So I'm hoping we can, bring some light to that today in this conversation. But I've been there 22 days. Was sworn in on January 1st, and I was really honored to have the state controller come down and administer the oath for me. I've known him since my first job out of college, actually. So he was on the Environmental Conservation Committee, and I was the committee clerk for that when Maurice Hinchy was in the Assembly. So that's how I first met Tom DiNapoli. And I've worked with him over the years on some issues like infrastructure investment by municipalities and also shareholder resolutions for the Common Retirement Fund. But I've been getting to know the staff inside the controller's office, and I have to say there's like a really sharp, great team there that I think has been undervalued and underutilized because of the strife between the executive, the controller, and the legislature. And we can talk more about that in a minute. But I'm finding there's like real talent that's untapped and could be really, think made to fuller use. And I'm learning a lot of the systems and the operations that we have going on. So yesterday I had like a full-on lesson on our bank reconciliation process. One of the responsibilities for the controller's office is to do bank reconciliations for the county's accounts. And so I was looking through that with one of the staff people who's primarily responsible for that. And, a lot of it's similar. I did the bank reconciliations at the Community Foundation, so I'm familiar with the process. And but it's a good way to dive in really deeply. And for me as a manager and as a supervisor, I like to see exactly the steps that my staff is going through on a day-to-day basis so I can advise them, so I can guide them, and so I can have a deep understanding of the work that we're doing in the office. So I've been getting lessons from the people on the ground and spending a lot of time on that. And then also, educating myself on some areas that I'm less familiar on, like government accounting standards, and spending time with the Yellow Book and really digging in deeply on things like that.
You yesterday you issued a press release, and in that press release you announced that you'll be posting vendor lists, and you announced two things. One is the vendor lists, and one is this confidential tip line. I want to talk about the vendor list just for a second. I went on that site today, and what I found was a list of vendors and how many invoices
and
they
amounts
submitted and the amounts that the county was paid.
But not what.
Exactly. What I didn't find was any context.
Yeah.
So my question is, what do you expect taxpayers to glean from that vendor list if they have no understanding of where or what that money, or why that money was spent there?
Right. So there's a couple of intricacies there that I want to get into on why we don't have what the money was spent on right now. Obviously, if you were to come to me, or if any taxpayer or citizen of the county were to come to me and say, why was the city of Kingston paid this amount of money in December? I can give you that answer. But what the county does, and this is actually smart on the operations side, is we batch all the invoices to a single vendor into a one check. So one check may be paying 10 invoices. So the what it paid for may have 10 separate fields. There right now is no consistency to the way departments are articulating what the invoice is being paid for. And this is something that we'll be talking about as we move forward into 2020, because I think it would be very helpful to be able to say, here's all the utility payments for the county. I can't give that to you right now in our financial system. Not every department is logging those payments in the same way. And that's something that we'll be talking about. So this is a backward look at 2019 data. Before I was there, I had no input into the consistency of terms that we're using in cataloging particular invoices, but it is something I will be looking at because I think that would be very helpful. Now, is there value to this money? I mean, to this data without that? There still is value. Why? I know for myself as a candidate running for office, if I had the ability to quickly and easily look up whether somebody was a vendor, it may have changed whether I took a donation from them to my campaign, just off the top level. So I think that there are accountability and transparency issues that seeing the vendor names and amounts is very helpful for. Now, the purpose of those payments, I think, does have to be unveiled, and it'll be my goal moving forward in 2020 to work with the administration and the departments to try to figure out how we can better articulate that in a way that can be summarized in a report. But this was the first step.
So for the average Ulster County resident, what do you see the value of that information?
I think people want to know who's being paid by the county. And the other thing is, I experienced, and I have experienced this on the job already, vendors want to know when they're going to be paid. And sometimes you will have a small business that is a subcontractor to another vendor, and their payment is awaiting the county payment to the prime vendor. This will answer that question for people in a more timely way. So they'll know, oh, has my prime contractor been paid? Can I expect to be paid soon? So it's beginning to sort of shed the light on some of these things.
And how often do you think that this will be sort of updated? This is going to be a monthly thing?
Yeah,
or?
We'll try to keep it within 30 days. So at the close of the month, it may take us a couple of weeks. Usually by the 20th of the month, we'll have the data for the previous month. So we're going to hopefully keep it current within 30 days. And honestly, it's going to take some time. It's not something that we're going to be able to produce instantaneously. The purpose of what each of these payments is for, because I'm going to have to really redesign how we share that information, because if there are 20 invoices going into a single check, we're going to have to figure out which pieces of the information we share. But we're going to work towards that, and it'll take us some time, but we're going to work towards it.
And the tip line, that was the other interesting announcement in your press release. What exactly is that about?
The goal really is to make sure that we are aware of and getting rid of any waste, fraud, or abuse. And so I want people to feel like they can communicate in a confidential way. I think the biggest area that we're going to see activity on is the waste part, because I think we have a lot of systems in place that we did not have in the early 2000s before we had a county executive form of government. We have a lot of systems in place now that I think capture fraud and abuse. But waste is an area where people who are boots on the ground in these departments and agencies can see places where we could have efficiencies. And I'm hoping they'll feel free to report those in to me. So I'm really, I'm all ears. I have literally had people throw open their office windows as I was walking down the street to get lunch and call me in to hand me documents from 2012, from when they served on a volunteer board of something that they thought should be looked at. And those kinds of people, I want them to feel like they can reach out. So that's really the purpose of it. Both county employees, volunteers, vendors, or just regular citizens.
Okay. I wanted to leave this topic for just a second, and I want to go back to some statements that you made before the Ulster County Legislature on December 18th at their last meeting. And those statements, you spoke before the legislature and criticized them, it seemed, for their lack of action regarding former legislator Hector Rodriguez and the allegations and the ultimately substantiated allegations of sexual abuse. And you called on the legislature to identify, strengthen disciplinary steps and corrective actions as called for in the existing policy and the investigation. And you warned them that Ulster County is in jeopardy for failure to address these issues. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you know of a sexual harassment claim and you do not take action, and that employee of the county continues to sexually harass you, you're at risk for litigation. So plain and simple, I think that by not taking disciplinary and corrective action, and that that individual still remained, Hector Rodriguez remained as a county legislator during that period of time. I don't know that he took any actions that were problematic, but he could have, and that is a risk to the county. The county was on notice of his actions. So that's what I'm saying. If you know about it, if you know about a problem, you need to pursue it and put it to rest as quickly as possible.
What action would you recommend, or would you expect the legislature to take against an independently elected county official?
Well, they can't terminate the official, but
Right.
I think does behoove them to, they have labor counsel. That's not my area of specialty, but I think they should be looking at other alternatives. Could you take away other privileges? Could you, I don't know the answer to this, but could you cease to make payments to pay somebody? Could you terminate their parking privileges? I have no idea. But
I see.
There are things beyond termination that could be done. And, I've worked on other disciplinary matters in county government where there were negotiated exits. Okay. So was that a possibility? And I think this really goes back to the legislature working with their labor council to figure out what the best way to handle it is. I'm sure this question has come up before in other elected bodies, and it's not my responsibility and won't be the focus of the Comptroller's office going forward. I can tell you that. But, there should have been swifter research and action on this. And by not seeing this to its conclusion in a rapid way, it meant that this person continued to serve for the entire rest of the term and could have been, doing things that put Ulster County in some legal jeopardy.
I mean, you did, when you addressed the legislature, say to them, I come to you as a watchdog. Because at that point you had been not sworn into office, but you had been elected. The county comptroller, which you have identified, you've said is the county watchdog. So you went to them as a watchdog. Do you feel that in your role as the county watchdog, you were warning them that they could be facing financial issues? I mean, is that?
We don't know what's happened in that intervening year, during that period of time, how his behavior was. So I don't have the answer to that. And I think the risk of that particular individual is now terminated in terms of the county. So it's more about, on a going forward basis, making sure that they really have the policy and procedure identified. Ulster County has a sexual harassment policy in place that applies to employees. County legislators are paid and they are employees. They may be special employees because they're elected, but they are employees. And that policy says that Ulster County broadly may take disciplinary action. It doesn't say who in the county, and it doesn't say what the actions are. And those are the two areas that I think when you're talking about an elected official need to be worked out. So, I think that needs to be looked at going forward.
Speaking of things that need to be looked at going forward, we're going to go back to your office and specifically. There had been some, well, let's just say that the term and the tenure of the former comptroller was controversial. There was a lot of strife, as you mentioned, between the legislature and the comptroller's office, between the county executive's office and the comptroller's office. And there was a lot of questions about the kind of work that was being produced within that office. I'm wondering if how you're going to do things differently, if you think you need to do things differently, and what those things would be.
I think I'm a different person, so it's definitely going to be different. And we have a different legislature and a different executive. So I think you're going to see the nature of the relationships just change naturally. But the way I like to think of the comptroller's office, it really has two main responsibilities. There's the claims auditing side, where we have staff day to day looking at every single payroll claim and every single vendor claim for payment and making sure that we have the funds in place to take care of that, albeit there's some caveats around that, as well as making sure that those claims are legitimately documented, that we got the services or goods that were provided. So there's a whole set of sort of claims auditing. The other side is the more general audit function, where we're picking a few areas to take a deep dive into each year and it's a very large budget. It's a $350 million budget. We have over 20 departments and administrative units. You're not getting to look at everything every year. So you're using a set of criteria to choose what you're going to look at each year. And I can tell you right up front, I am using different criteria than the previous controller. And I am going to change the way that we approach what we are going to audit each year. So on the claims audit side, there's a pretty standard set of rules in terms of the claims audit stuff. I may make some changes there, especially given, the work that we're doing now in transparency on the vendor payment side. But on the general audit side, I think you will see changes. I think you'll see changes in the things that we're focusing on. There were areas that the previous controller identified and spent time on, like physical security and information services, that for now, my focus will be financial. I think that issues were raised on physical security in the past, and I think the new sheriff is aware of those and has begun to take some actions on them. And I think the county executive is coming from the information systems field, because that's where his previous work was. So I'm going to give him a minute to figure out what's happening and whether or not there are additional information services security measures that need to be taken. We're going to be looking at financial measures.
Have you started any of those audits yet?
We have notified the executive's office and the finance department that we will be beginning our field work on our first financial audit beginning on the 27th of January. And I can tell you and tell the readers what that is. And I think it's interesting, given Hudson Valley One's publication yesterday on the Airbnb revenues. We will be looking at occupancy tax revenue collection for short-term rentals.
Why that in particular?
Because the numbers are very large. And I think if you look at the Airbnb press release, it was $31 million in 2019. And just a back of the envelope calculation of what we should have been collecting in bed tax shows that there could be some revenues that are not being collected. And, there's been a lot of work and a lot of discussion in previous reports looking at whether or not we should sign the what's called the voluntary collection agreement. It's a terrible word that Airbnb uses. It's voluntary to sign up with Airbnb as a municipality. It's not voluntary to pay your tax. So let's just make that clear. And those numbers, those revenue numbers are clouded because you have hotels and motels also booking through Airbnb in some cases. So it's intricate, it's complicated, but we are the most impacted upstate county. I mean, I know this from research that I did during my campaign, and I think that this latest set of numbers from 2019 shows that it's true. Ulster County has more hosts and more revenue and more guests than any other upstate county. So we should be the leaders in figuring out how to benefit, both on the tax side and also on the economic impact side. We have people who are making good incomes and are creating a lot of jobs because of these Airbnb and other short-term rental platforms.
And just to help our readers understand the issue, a traditional hotel, whether it's the Marriott or a Super 8, they pay an occupancy tax based on the rental of a room.
Correct.
People who will rent out their homes or a room in their homes don't necessarily pay that same tax. Is that?
Well, they should be paying that tax. And it's actually, the hotels, because they have finance staff, because they have easier, better tracking systems, and they pay quarterly, it's easier for them, I think, to make the quarterly payments. They're registered with the county. We know who they are. They often have Department of Health permits, et cetera, et cetera. On the individual short-term rental owner side, it's harder for them because they have to keep track themselves. We're reaching out to them. We have a contract with a third-party vendor that scours the internet to determine who is a rental property in Ulster County, and then reports back to us those properties. And then we reach out to them and try to register them. But it's harder for those people. And I've actually seen on some Airbnb operator boards that those people are frustrated by the process that we have right now, where they're having to make their own calculations. They're having to send in a check every quarter. And, they may not be business owners. They may be individuals. So it would be ideal to have a system that was simpler to use, that was easier to use, that really is capturing all the revenue.
Are you looking at other communities that have models for taxes? Cape Cod, I just happen to know this because I was looking at it. It's got a 12.45 tax for rentals, which is new.
Yes.
Like what are we talking about in terms of like what is the county looking at in terms of how much the tax, which eventually comes down to the consumer.
Right.
Right. I mean, I think if you look at us in our region, we are extremely low. Our occupancy tax is 2%. Our neighbors, Orange and Dutchess County, are 4 and 5%. Saratoga County is 9%. But at this point, that's not the focus of our audit. The focus of our audit is going to be, are we collecting everything that we should be, given the current tax? And then that is really going to be a question for the legislature and executive. We certainly will be able to put forward numbers of, if we had a occupancy tax that was higher or more, this is what it would result in revenue. But right now, our question is going to be, are we collecting the revenues we should be, and then making recommendations about better revenue collection methodology.
Is there a sense that there's a lot of houses that are in dark that are not being counted?
Well, let's put it this way. The finance department doesn't necessarily break out right now and report in a public way the difference between hotel occupancy tax versus short-term rental occupancy tax. So this is something that we need to really more clearly identify. But in my conversations with them, I was understood that in 2018, we had approximately $181,000 in short-term rental tax collection. And it should have been much higher if you look at the Airbnb revenue numbers coming through Ulster County. And again, because Airbnb was saying that we had $24 million in revenues, that should have been, well over $400,000 in occupancy tax. But there's a caveat here. To the extent that hotels and motels are booking through Airbnb and paying that tax separately, that may not be missing revenue. It's going to take some work to tease it out.
And Airbnb isn't the only short-term rental
Right.
site,
HomeAway,
right? There's HomeAway, there's Verbio, right? And they don't necessarily report the same way that the Airbnb does,
Correct.
do they?
No, I've been looking to see, like, do they issue press releases where they're giving that kind of data? They really don't. And that's frustrating. I mean, it's actually, a benefit to us as a community to be able to have some, visibility on those Airbnb numbers. I appreciate that they report it. They don't have to report it in that way, but they do. They are patting themselves on the back about how great they are. I'm sitting here thinking, how can we get more money out of you?
Because this really is sort of a growing sort of economic kind of engine, right? This whole short-term rental
Absolutely.
business.
And, this is one of the things I looked at during my campaign that I didn't put out, and eventually had Kingston Tenants Union take the data from this and put it out themselves. But 3% of our housing units are listed on Airbnb. That's a big amount of housing stock when you are facing an affordable housing crisis. So there is not just an economic benefit, and there is a huge economic benefit that hasn't really been calculated, right? But there's also an impact on the housing side. And we are definitely feeling that pinch. And we are, I looked at every county upstate, and I can tell you we are one of the most impacted counties in terms of the percentage of housing units that are being Airbnb'd at this time. There's one or two counties that have bigger numbers. I think if you look at Kingston Tenants Union's data, they've put it out and you can see it now.
There's a hodgepodge of regulations depending on what town you're planning to, and so it basically goes all over the place, and some other communities are impacted differently. I mean, Woodstock is basically ground zero for all this stuff, and then it's creeping up in Kingston. You see it happening in Akron and other places. But then every town has different regulations. Is that going to impact like how things are counted or taxed? I
mean, I think that it's a home rule issue, just like any kind of zoning and planning issue. And I think the towns, you're starting to see them take action, and I like that they're sharing information amongst the municipalities. That's great. The county has been able to share some of that data that's coming back from our third-party vendor about who's out there as an Airbnb property and who we're trying to get registered, so that they can also then register with their town. And we are seeing, increased registrations in towns where they are regulating short-term rentals. But it's going to remain a home rule issue, how you regulate these properties and where you permit them to be and how many you want to have. We're going to be just really focused on the revenue side.
And so what you'll be looking at is whether the county is getting the tax revenue. When we talk about revenue, we mean the tax revenue that they're supposed to be getting from these Airbnbs, and that information is information that you will get through your third-party vendor?
No, I mean, we're going to audit what's there. We're going to look at what's
Gotcha.
been collected, and we're going to look at, and hopefully in a deeper way, what should have been collected given the numbers that are out there, making some calculations for hotels and motels that may have gone through the system. And I want to say something else, which is that the method of revenue collection right now, which is to have a third-party vendor scouring and determining what rentals are out there, and then us, the county, the finance department, seeking to register them, has resulted in a big increase in revenue. So I want to be clear that we've made a lot of progress to date. I don't think it's perfect, but thank goodness we've done what we have. So there's been, I think we probably will note that as well in what we're looking at, that, wow, we really have brought more people online to the registration process, and we have more people paying into the tax than ever before. The other interesting thing, and this is a state issue, is that, you know, it's not just occupancy tax. I mean, there's sales tax issues here. And that's a state issue. Some states have entered into voluntary collection agreements with Airbnb, and in some cases you'll rent somewhere and you'll see there'll be a sales tax addition to your bill. So we do not have the authority in the county to do that ourselves because it's a state issue. So that would have to go to the state. And we also have an impact on state on sales tax collection for rentals under something called the bungalow exception, which is a state law that allows people who are renting out a small bungalow on their property to not collect sales tax. So there's a lot of state issues here too. And I would like to see the legislature and executive have really good and complete information on the financial side about what's happening here in the county, so that when they're speaking to policymakers in Albany, they can speak to some of those other issues.
So just one more question about this, on this topic. If I go, are you saying if I go to the Marriott and I rent a hotel room, I pay the sales tax plus a 2% occupancy tax? If I rent a house in Woodstock, I don't pay sales tax?
I believe they're not collecting sales tax through Airbnb itself, but that vendor should be paying sales tax, assuming they don't fall under the bungalow exception. So
then the county could be losing twice, because it would be losing the county's sales tax plus the additional occupancy tax.
That is possible. You know, now the short-term rental owner who's doing everything right, who doesn't fall under the bungalow exception, it's included in the price that they're charging you, and then they're making a payment, right? They're making a sales tax payment quarterly. We can't really see that exactly right now, and there may be an impact there. I don't know.
Is that something that this audit will look at?
This audit is going to focus on occupancy tax only right now. Yep.
How long do you expect that audit to take?
I think our field work will be under a month, and then we're going to have to write it up. So it's going to be a while.
One of the things that you had asked at budget time was for additional increases in salary for your auditors, because you said you expected to work them harder.
Oh, I am already.
Is that the fact that you didn't get that increase going to impact your abilities?
No, it turns out, and this is kind of a twist of kind of government accounting and government budgeting, but because I have some vacancies right now, the director of internal audit is a vacancy and I'm trying to hire for that position. If you're a CPA and you do government accounting work and you've supervised people in the past and you're an auditor, send me a resume. So I have a vacancy there, and I have a vacancy in the confidential secretary position that'll be filled shortly. So it actually creates a little bit of slack in the personnel line, where I'm able to keep those auditors at really a 40-hour week, which is where I need them. But I am expecting a lot more work right now. And I mean, I'm changing everything that we're doing. For example, we typically will survey county departments and administrative units. The Comptroller's office does a paper survey. Paper survey? What? No, it's no longer paper. This is now going to be a digital survey. I've really changed the survey so that we're only asking questions we need the answers to that will actually impact the decision about whether or not we audit a department. So I've changed that whole system, which means I have spent time of the auditors over the last 22 days modifying the risk assessment tool we use to make decisions about what we're going to audit. So I can tell you right now, they're already, having to do things they weren't doing in the past.
You mentioned the internal, the director of internal audit. The legislature did give you a salary increase for that position.
And I am so thankful, because I can tell you right now that we have some great candidates applying for the position, and I expect to fill that within a couple of weeks and have somebody really good there. So, and I don't think that would have been possible at the previous salary. I think it would have been much more of a stretch. And now I really feel like that's opened up the field to get people with the kind of experience that they need. That position is overseeing auditors, senior auditors who have 10 years of experience. So it really needs to be somebody who understands and, who was grounded in audit experience.
By the way, have there been any personnel changes in your office since you took office?
No. I am not. First of all, I have 4 people who are CSEA, 2 claims auditors and 2 senior auditors. So there's not appointment discretion there. I have a confidential secretary position that'll be filled within the next couple of weeks.
Also new?
Yes. It was an administrative assistant line, and the director of internal audit that'll be filled in the next couple of weeks. And then there's a deputy, and Evan Gallo is serving as the deputy comptroller right now. And it's interesting. Elliot Auerbach had said, it's great having him there. He's a lawyer, he can write, but I'm a lawyer and I can write. So his skill set is a little bit too aligned with mine and not exactly what I need in that position. And he knows this, we've talked about it. So over the next, this is definitely going to come up in 2020 where I'll be making some changes there, but he's been excellent to work with to this point, really bringing me up to speed on what I need. And I'm hoping, he lives in Albany, so I'm hoping that he'll find something that's directly aligned with. So you'll see a change in that position as well over 2020.
I did notice, as I looked back at the Comptroller's website, that at the end of December, it appears that acting Comptroller Adele Ryder contracted with a third party to conduct a telecommunication and utility audit?
Yeah. So what this is, it's a company called Troy & Banks, and they work with municipalities all over, beyond New York State, but certainly in New York. I know Rockland County has worked with them, Dutchess County has worked with them to look through the relationships with utility and telecommunications to see if there are opportunities for savings. And they have identified, I talked to Robin Lois about it in Dutchess, they have identified a few $1,000s of savings. The nice part of their contract is they're only paid a percentage of what they find in savings. So it's not a big outlay of money for the county. And that was something that Comptroller Ryder was working on before she left.
What is the status of that?
I believe we just finished providing them all the invoices for telecom and utility. So they're looking at that now. Yeah. I think the work has to be completed. I think that we're working under a contract that was originally set up by Rockland County, and we kind of came under that agreement with them. So it was due to expire in March, but I think it's going to go on a little bit beyond that.
Earlier in our conversation, you mentioned the strife that existed, and I think we talked about this a second ago. But one of the really major issues that sort of came up toward the end of both the terms of, or the tenures, I guess, not terms, the tenures of Elliot and Mike Hine, was this whole issue of accessing computer files and information. And the county executive claimed that the comptroller had accessed the administration's own sort of confidential work files. The position of the comptroller was that they have access to everything and anything that they want. How do you feel about that?
Well, I feel like I'm getting grounded in what I actually have access to right now. And I can tell you, we have a financial system called New World, and I have gone through all of the modules of that to see what access I have. I was granted the same access that Elliot had, and when I went into it, it really wasn't sufficient for my needs. I was able to sit down with finance department staff, identify those areas I want to be able to look at, and that access is being opened up right now. So it's going to take me some time to figure out if there are things that I think I don't have access to that I should. I probably will interpret my access responsibility as broadly as possible because it's in my benefit to do so. But right now I'm going to work through the channels that are open to me, that are well known, before I start digging things that, I think are going to make people uncomfortable. I think it was very unfortunate, the set of back and forth that happened on that, because I think it really undermines the regular work that the office does and hinders our ability to communicate some of the good work that we're doing, because it becomes a fight about access or a fight about, improper usage of computer security rather than focusing on the good work that's happening. You don't see that kind of argument happening right now between Robin Lois and Mark Molinaro. Okay. So there's a lot I can do with what I have, especially with the expanded access that I personally am getting in our financial system. I'll just give you an example. I've always been dying to know, how much money do we spend on credit cards every year for the county?
How much money do we spend on credit cards?
Over $260,000 last year. These are places where the departments are using a credit card because they need to, for whatever reason, to make a vendor purchase or travel or whatever it is. And my question, and I haven't finished the answer to this, is like, do we get points for that? Do we get miles for that?
Who uses those points or miles?
Who uses them, if we do get them? And more importantly, if we were to set up a system like that, should we be putting more on a credit card? Could we actually use our purchasing power to benefit ourselves, to benefit our taxpayers more? So those are questions that I wouldn't have been able to ask before, but that I was kind of dying to know the answer to.
I mean, so is that something that your office is looking into, the use of
on the side
cards?
You're not going to see that like as a big area in some sort of report. We do an annual report to the legislature and executive. You won't see that as its own area. I'm telling you, that's something that I personally am interested in. Yeah.
One of the things that from my time in Dutchess County, I recall they've had a fairly active county comptrollers over the years. And one of the things that I recall them looking a lot at are the so-called contract agencies, and whether these not-for-profits that the county contracts with to provide services, the county is actually getting those services, getting what the county pays for. Do you expect to be looking at contract agencies at all, or will you be focusing really sort of narrowly on the county departments?
We will not be ruling them out. I mean, when you think about the kinds of services the county provides to citizens and people inside the county, a lot of that is through contract agencies. So we are not ruling that out as something that we will look at. And I can't tell you, what my risk assessment is going to turn up or what tips or, ideas I get throughout the year, but I'm not ruling out contract agencies. And I do think that's something that we need to make sure that we're getting the value for what we've provided. And, that was an issue I had to face at the Community Foundation as well, because our grant agreements essentially are contracts for services. So I do think that's important. And then the other thing is, we have what are called administrative units that aren't per se departments, that we still have authority over: the Industrial Development Agency, the Resource Recovery Agency. I can't tell you those are going to pop out as something that we look at this year, but I'm going to interpret our discretion and our authority as broadly as possible.
Because one of the contract agencies that the county did have discovered had an issue with was the Lower Esopus River Watch, right?
That's right. Yep.
And that was a contract agency that the county was paying for services that apparently they weren't.
And it came up on, and it's interesting, we were talking about the general audit side versus the claims audit side. It came up on the claims audit side, where those claim auditors are looking at every bill that we're getting and asking, did we get the service or goods that we said we paid for? And we had one come across the desk last week, where it was something that had been bought on a credit card. It was an actual good. I'm not going to say what it was, and I'm not going to say the department, but that credit card bill needed to be paid. Otherwise, there was going to be an interest charge, and the department had not received the good because it was purchased online. So we didn't have it. They didn't have it in hand yet. So I was not comfortable paying that credit card bill. It turns out that we were able to go through tracking and see that it was being delivered that day. But it was the claims auditor who raised that. We didn't get the product that we paid for. Why are we paying this bill? So yes, Lower Esopus River Watch was one of those same circumstances. And, I think good work was done there.
when you talk about, and we've got about 20 minutes, so we're gonna sort of hit on a couple of other topics. When you talk about the relationships between the executive and the legislature, you say you want to have a good relationship, you want to have a good repertoire and a rapport rather, excuse me, and be able to work together. But I guess my question is that really the job of the county watchdog? Aren't you supposed to be watching what they do? So isn't it by nature supposed to be a bit of an adversarial
It
relationship?
is, and I think you will see, places where we diverge in our interests and our focus. And I think you can look at, Comptroller DiNapoli and the governor to see, a place where people are of the same party, but they still may not directly align everywhere. But I would not say they have a bad relationship. And it certainly doesn't rise to the level of what we saw here in Ulster County during the last administration. The same is true with, the Comptroller and the executive across the river. They are different political parties. The Comptroller's office is identifying places that really could use significant improvement. They have a good relationship. A relationship is something where you are able to work professionally with somebody, even when you disagree, for the best, for the betterment of the county. And I think that's the thing that we need to keep in mind. Is this really making life better for the people in Ulster County? Is it using our resources as efficiently as possible? And we may not agree. And we may not, I may be presenting findings that, frankly, the executive or the legislature doesn't want to see, but we can still be professional. And that's what I'm talking about when I talk about having a good relationship. I'm saying having a good professional relationship.
One of the other things that we saw coming out of the former comptroller's administration was reports that were quite frankly riddled with error. Math error, calculation error. I will be the first one to say that math and I do not get along, but I was even able to look at some of those documents and say, holy mackerel, this is wrong. How do you protect against that going forward?
Look, mistakes happen everywhere. Right. I think for me, as a professional in the fields I've worked in, I think it's really important to acknowledge when you have made an error and be able to move on and improve your processes from that. I wasn't there during that time when those mistakes were made. And I've said to the team, I know we always put out quarterly reports, and I also know nobody reads them. People are going to read our reports right now. This is a new day. In fact, it's a new decade. And we need to be even more careful about the work that we're doing than ever before. So, I'm going to take very personal responsibility. And if there's an error, I'm going to own it, but I'm going to be on it to make sure that I feel comfortable with what we're putting out. And that's really the best offering I can make right now. And again, I think on the staffing side, I'm looking to bring in people who really have the skill sets that we need in those positions. These should not be political appointments. They should not be friends. They should be people who really know how to do this kind of work and will work well as a team. And I think that's been a problem in the past. So that's what I'm looking for.
Okay, I think that I'm going to think for a minute here. When you the other responsibility is not just auditing, right? But you also issue reports, which are different than the financial audits, than the dollars and cents. We've seen a variety of reports that have looked at a number of issues. I think one of them was the medical examiner and whether or not Ulster should be going with an in-house medical examiner or should continue its contract with Westchester County. That wasn't an audit per se as much as it was a report. We've had reports on inventory, procedures. Do you see that also as a?
Well, let me just say that audits can be financial audits or performance audits. So how are these operations working? Are we doing this process and this operation well and correctly and as efficiently as possible, which is a different question than just the financial side. And when I said I'm going to focus on financial, I wasn't really meaning to say that we're never going to do performance audits. I'm just saying that that's going to be our first priority right now. But if you look at some of the other controllers' offices around the state, you can see places where they've delved into areas like racial equity. So the Nassau County Comptroller issued a racial equity study for Nassau County that was extremely compelling. And I know from my work in the philanthropic field that it really changed the way philanthropy works in Nassau County, and also a deep look at government services and equity issues. So I'm not ruling that out. I would love to see a racial equity study, frankly, for the whole Hudson Valley. I think that's a missing piece of information and data that we could really use here. So yeah, I think that there will be times that we look at issues like that. Yeah, I think that there will be times we look at things like that. And I look forward to hearing from, that's a place where it might be helpful to hear from the executive and the legislature on issues that they are concerned about or things that they think that would be helpful to look at. But our focus right now is going to be primarily on the financial audit side.
And how many audits do you think that you'll be able to conduct this year?
I can't give you the answer to that. I looked back at the work they did last year. In the past, we've issued an audit plan in advance each year by April 1st. And I do not anticipate issuing a plan that lays out every minute of our time, because we need to be able to be responsive to things as they arise. So I can't give you the answer to that. Depends on how big certain things are, certain areas, and how much detailed work they take. But more than last year. A lot more than last year, because during the transition, a lot of the things that were on that plan did not get done. So, yeah. And one of the things, Pat, that I should say that I do plan to do, and this is something I can tell you up front, is that I plan to do what's called a popular annual financial report. We do a consolidated annual financial report right now, we meaning Ulster County. It comes out of the finance department. It's a big document that really takes a deep dive looking at the finances of the county. There is a complementary report called a PAFR. So one is the CAFR, the other is the PAFR. The PAFR really enables the citizens, the people who live in the county, to be able to see what's going on with the finances. We don't provide that right now. And it means that it's hard to access that information for regular individuals. Regular individuals, when they look at the CAFR or the Consolidated Annual Financial Report, their eyes glaze over. It's not presented in a fluid way. It's not honed down to those things that taxpayers and citizens and residents might care most about. So that is something I'm going to add in. I've talked to the finance department about it and others in the executive, and I'm excited about that. I think that could really bring some clarity for regular people into, like, what do we spend our money on?
So, and that was my question. What exactly will that tell me that the budget doesn't?
Well, you're a reporter, so your look at the budget is a little bit deeper. I know you say you're not a numbers person, but you've been looking at this budget for many, many, many years. I mean, and I have to say, this is one of the first ways I ever met my kind. Was I was working with Ulster County Democratic women after the legislature flipped to Democratic control. We had a very big tax increase, and I was concerned that the budget was not understood by people and prepared. I remember cold calling him the first time and saying, I want to get this data from you. And he was like, I'm not giving you anything. You better come in here and meet with me. And I worked with a team to prepare sort of a graphical look at the budget that had never been done before. We didn't present the budget in any graphical way at that time. It really helped to show, first of all, we all see the pie chart now. We're used to it, right? County tax dollars are not a big part of your property tax bill. But if you look at county finances in general, how much is sales tax? How much is property tax? How much is occupancy tax? How much are, federal and state aid? Those kind of questions, seeing that in a very obvious way is helpful. So I think that some of that is provided in the budget now, but we can go a little bit deeper into certain areas that will really help people see how these things changed over time. And where should we expect the future to go?
And that's what this PAFR will provide us?
Yeah, and the PAFR actually goes beyond just the regular financials. The county might pull in interesting information. Like I was just saying, 3% of our housing units are locked up by Airbnb. Housing is such a critical issue right now in the county, and you see, the legislature talking about it and the executive. We might want to pull in some housing data and provide that context where we think it's relevant to highlight some of these other, other financial numbers in the PAFR.
And so that would be an annual report that would be released at the end of the year. Is that the thinking?
I'm trying to
on that?
determine what the timing will be. There's certain financial data that's available in April that I can start working with, but the CAFR is not usually done until much later. So we're looking right now internally at the timing of when we'll be able to get that done.
And then one other question I have about, and it's, will it be the comptroller's role, or do you see it as the comptroller's role to look at the impact of bail reform on the jail population and the costs?
I mean, I've already had conversations with the new DA, the sheriff, and the county judge about this, as well as the executive. We all have to be thinking about this because it is going to be a very large impact on the finance side. And other counties have been looking at repurposing, their jails. I mean, we not only have the old jail, we have the new jail, and we're going to see a lot of space there that's unused, and it still costs money to operate. So yeah, this is definitely something that we will be taking a look at, but not in a hostile and aggressive way, in a way that is supportive of the policymakers as they move forward. What information do they need to make good decisions is kind of the approach I'm going to take. And are there models around the country or in other parts of the state of New York that could be identified as positive? I mean, Albany County has repurposed part of their jail for homeless services. I think that is problematic for our law enforcement center, given the way it's configured, the location. There's a number of issues there that make it more difficult than the Albany County facility. But I hope to get up to the Albany County facility with a team of other countywide elected officials to take a look at that.
Interesting. I think that probably.
I had a small question. I don't know if you know the answer, but we were talking about the election process and how you have like 2 years and there's a term limit.
I don't know the answer to that. I know what you're
Yes.
getting at. So I have a 12-year term limit, which would be 3 full terms.
Right.
Now I'm filling a half a term. So does that mean I'm going to have to step down in the middle of a term if I continue to serve? So I have another election in 2021. That will be a 4-year term. So I don't know the answer to that, whether I would be required to step down in the middle of a term. I have found on the nonprofit side, as an attorney advising nonprofits, that generally filling a vacancy doesn't count towards the term limits. That's the way it's interpreted many times. I don't know if that's true on the government side, on the public
Interesting.
service side. So we'll see.
And you've been meeting with, you mentioned Robin Lois a couple of times. You've been meeting with other comptrollers around the region, getting sort of a sense of what they're doing and best practices. Is that something?
By phone.
Okay.
Because it's hard. I mean, Robin and I happen to be at the state together, but we've talked on the phone a couple of times. And I've called other controllers that I know, both in New York, including the state controller's office, and outside. I mean, my thought is, don't just look in New York when you're looking at best practices, right? For anything, because we may not be the best. So, I've spoken to controllers' offices in Florida, in Texas, and Pennsylvania so far, and just trying to get a sense of what they do. And a lot of times their responsibilities are different. And I should also note, I've been in conversation with Sue Rizzo, the new controller for Albany County. And many times, like I said, like that department, that controller's office really handles a lot of the functions that we have in the finance department here in Ulster County. So it depends on their governing documents, like their charter, what responsibilities they have. But I do think it's a good idea to find out how other people are doing things. Absolutely.
And then we'll wrap it up. So, well, we're just gonna give you a chance to.
Yeah.
Great.
We've got about 7 minutes, I think. So I'll give you a chance to just sort of make some closing statements, tell folks what you're looking forward to, and we'll call it a day.
Great. It's funny. I didn't think we'd be able to go an hour. I mean, I think I said to you on the phone, an hour. How are we going to fill that time? But here we are. We're at the end. Yeah. So we did set up this tip line. I hope people will think about it. This is really, if you know or are concerned about waste, fraud, or abuse, and you have an idea for me, I'd like to hear it. The phone number is 845-481-0420. You can send me an email that's outside of the county system at ulstertip@gmail.com. Or send us a letter. You could send an anonymous letter to the controller's office at P.O. Box 1800, Kingston, New York, 12402. So I want people to feel like they can communicate with us if they have ideas. I'd like to hear those. And I'm really looking forward to digging in. I'm at the beginning. I mean, you said 22 days. I hadn't counted, but I'm trying to learn what all the staff does on a regular basis. And I am looking at the systems that we have in place to make decisions going forward. Like, what agencies are we going to and departments are we going to audit this year, and how are we going to make those decisions, and really digging in and trying to find the best practices and how other people make those decisions, to make sure that we're doing it the best way, and in a way that I feel like I can take responsibility for and defend. Because I think that, you raised this issue before, that there is a natural tension between the branches of government and the Comptroller's office, as there should be when you're a watchdog. And there are going to be times when I'm going to have to explain, like, this is why I made this decision and I'm comfortable with it. So it means that in terms of building the foundational work of the office, I need to really make sure that I understand what we're doing and that I'm comfortable with it. So that's what my time is focused on right now. We are starting our first audit. We're going to be looking at short-term rental occupancy tax revenues. And I'm excited about that because this is such an important area for Ulster County. We are the most impacted county in terms of revenues, guests, and hosts in any of the upstate counties. And we should be the leader in tax collection and in economic benefit. And I really hope to be providing information that will enable the executive and the legislature to, both speak to Albany, but also set policy and law here. So I'm excited about that. And again, we'll be adding in some other critical tools that I think will help daylight county finances. We put up the vendor payments by month right now. You can access them on our website. Go to the county website, look for the Comptroller's office, and you can see the vendor payments database for 2019. You can check on your brother-in-law's contract. I go right ahead, or your friend who's a consultant. So I think it's interesting. I recognize that data is not as complete as we like, that it doesn't have the purpose of each of those payments. For example, you're going to look at December of 2019, and Kingston is the top vendor, the city of Kingston. You're like, wait, what? The county is, the city of Kingston is a vendor to the county. First of all, anyone we pay, we call a vendor. So I need to make that clear. We're making a payment. We internally call it a vendor. I know regular people don't think of it that way, but the finance side, that's how we think of it. Yeah, we make payments to the city of Kingston. We pay them sales tax. We buy water from them. We make up back taxes on property sales for properties, that have been taken by the county. So all three of those things could be captured in that one payment. That's why I say it's difficult to tease out exactly what the purpose is, but I know people are hungry for that information. So we'll be looking at ways to, at least make more consistent things that people might want to take a look at on a regular basis. For example, utilities. For us on this utility and telecom audit that, we've now hired a third-party vendor for, that Adele Ryder did before she left. It would have been great if we could have just put in a single search for the word utility in the purpose field, and that wasn't possible. So we'll be looking at that going forward. But I'm excited to be there. I think there's a really great team there. I have already, been in regular communication with Pat Ryan and with the legislature, and I think that's really great. Pat and I rode together to an event at the Bruderhof, and I said to him, we're making history right now, right? Being in the car together. But really, that saves the county money for us to be driving together, and it's an opportunity for us to talk about some of the issues that are affecting the county. So, and I think that we'll see how the legislature shapes up under Dave Donaldson's leadership. I worked with Dave when I was chair of the IDA, and he was the chair of the legislature, and we had a good working relationship. And just to reiterate, good working relationship doesn't mean you agree on everything. It means that you're professional and appropriate and kind, and that doesn't mean that you have to agree on everything. So I'm looking forward to making sure that we have a professional relationship among the branches of government.
Okay, terrific. Well, thank you very much again for coming in today. It was a pleasure to talk to you. And I'm sure we'll be speaking as your term progresses.
I hope so. Thanks
Thank
for
you.
having me in. I really appreciate the time.